the Angel of Beaver Island. Acknowledge the fact that your life is unrighteous. Stop deceiving yourself and making excuses. For once you do that, you will find out what to do, where to go, and how to act, and you will be rewarded. The first and unquestionable duty of a man is to take part in the struggle with nature for his own life and for the lives of others. Do not profit by the labor of others. Do with your own hands all that you can do. Your first duty is to care for your own basic needs. Yourself, your own family, those of your children. You need to keep your life simple, and you need to arrange your life so that you can do this. Eat bread produced by your own hand and share it with others who are doing the same. For that is the way. Protar, in his own words. On Monday, April 17th, 1893, Protar wrote in his diary, quote, "Finished! A different life." He wrote this as he set out for the 7:15 a.m. Rock Island Line train for Chicago. The city was full of excitement with last-minute preparations for the grand opening of the World's Fair on May 1st. But Protar had no time for this. He stayed only long enough to purchase the requisites for his intended life as a farmer, including 3 horses, before he headed north, most likely by ship, across the great and expansive Lake Michigan. Protar arrived on Beaver Island on Wednesday, April 26, 3 days after he signed the deed conveying him for the consideration of $800 to the 200 acres belonging to a local family. So, planning to work his land, Protar advertised for a farmer to come to work for a little bit with him on the island to show him the ropes. A man named Wilkie interviewed for the job in early May of that year and returned a month later to begin work. Protar had decided to build a house at the western end of his property for the man's wife, and their 4 children, and with local help, started to cut and fit logs for it. But Wilkie was disappointed. According to some, the guy actually didn't know nothing about farming. And quote from Patrick Bonner here, "God, the man plowed 3 feet deep, down as far as the plow would go, with 3 horses on." You know, in early July, only a couple months later, things came to a head when this Wilkie guy refused to let Protar use one of his own horses. Protar sent him packing, of course, and, well, apparently made aware of his own shortcomings in the face of reality, ended his career as a farmer before it even barely begun. Now, with no need to build a tenant house, Protar gave the finished logs that he had already done to the McCafferty family, as their nearby house had just burned down in March of this last year. This great gift, this great act of charity and benevolence, was the foundation in how he would build his homestead and his life on Beaver Island. Now, after his first winter, which was pretty rough, Protar apparently undertook extensive renovations to make this old, abandoned house they had moved into livable. A Michigan cellar was dug in the sand under the kitchen. There were indications that he moved the entrance from the center of the front wall to the western end, creating an entryway that could be closed off by doors in the kitchen and living room with a transom over the kitchen door. One of the main concerns undoubtedly was the insulation, where he may have been able to apply his training as a civil engineer. The living room was completely paneled, including a fine tongue-and-groove construction on the ceiling, which was raised nearly a foot. The result of the peculiar drop-offs and the 2 small bedrooms upstairs under the eaves, which he didn't even use except for storage. The outer walls of the kitchen were lined with whitewashed asbestos cloth, which was, in common use at the time to reduce the danger of fire. And those are the entryway with pasteboard and several layers of newspaper, which you'll be able to see in this video. He also installed storm doors and storm windows, which were removed in early spring of the next year. A Michigan cellar was dug into the sand under the kitchen, and living room, and insulated against winter frost, always successfully with stacking and double windows. A large shed attached to the back of the house was used for as a summer kitchen to store firewood, and he rebuilt the front porch and planted hops and later grapevines to make it into an arbor. All this was not to say that Protar did the actual construction himself. He had no training or experience in carpentry. And it was actually said by a lot of the islanders and a lot of the neighbors that he was pretty clumsy with tools. Now, besides the house, which had been basically built in 1858 from cedar logs, about 24 inches thick, the farmstead included several outbuildings, a barn on the east side, an outhouse in the back, and next to the house, 2 small sheds, according to pictures from the time. The barn collapsed in 1902 after what's estimated to be 43 years and was rebuilt on the same site. One of the most notable features of the house, at least as seen in early photographs, was the number of large barrels both in the front and the back, 4 or 5 in all. They probably held his water supply, rain collected from the eaves troughs or dripping from the open well, which most farmsteads had in those days. Now, although Protar gave up farming as his major occupation, he did use his land to grow what he needed for himself and his animals. His neighbors planted and harvested hay, corn, oats, and other feed crops on his fields for him, and, we should mention, with his blessing. But they would also plant this stuff for themselves. He would hire island men who needed gainful work to help with this and that or other chores, like chopping wood, mending fences. On the west side of the house, he planted kind of a windbreak, it consisted of fruit trees and a few nut trees. But how did this man become the angel of the island? How did this man reach so many people and so many hearts that they built his own tomb? Well, first of all, it's not known officially when or how Protar actually began his medical activities on the island, but there is evidence that he functioned as a veterinarian for his animals before he served as a doctor for his neighbors. And that's where he became an angel, is when he became a doctor for his neighbors. And so for the first bit, it seems that according to his journals and some of the neighbors' journals that have been found, that he was mostly taking care of animals. In one of his medical ledgers, actually, it includes routine notations on the treatment of 5 specific horses and 2 specific pigs. So it's given that it was probably a natural step to apply the similar care and knowledge to the islanders, especially the poor islanders, and medicinal needs. So sometime around the turn of the century, Protar found the one part of his island experience that had been lacking. He needed a useful service that he could provide for the people he had chosen to live among, which was essential to his vision for a new way of life. If you move to Beaver Island, or if you have moved to Beaver Island, there's still people trying to find that purpose. Unfortunately, most of our houses are people who summer up here and really aren't necessarily part of the island community as far as year-rounders. But the year-rounders, you tend to find something that will serve a purpose for the island. This isn't just doing your job, showing up to work every day. This is something above and beyond. This is what every islander, year-round islander who's raising families and living amongst neighbors here on Beaver Island, outside of the tourist seat, this is what we all need to do. And it was right around the turn of the century that he found his. He expanded his practice right around 1905 when there was a doctor on the island named Dr. Wilkinson who kept a stock of medicines which he dispensed on the island. He ended up moving back to the mainland, leaving the island with no doctor. And so, for instance, right after that, smallpox was discovered on the island, specifically in the lumber company camp. And thankfully, thanks to Protar's work, it was limited to 13 cases and 0 deaths. Now, this extended for another 10-year period to 20-year period where it shows that he had a well-established practice. And he would limit himself. His practice consisted primarily of giving out remedies and good advice. And here's the thing, he would do it all free of charge. He refused all payment for his services, not only because he was a very generous and sharing person and believed that this was the benevolence he could give the people of the island, his neighbors, his fellow islanders, especially those not of well-off means. But there was a sidebar there. He also did it so he would avoid legal troubles. He was practicing medicine without proper qualifications, and he would be against the law if he accepted any fees. That's not to say that there wouldn't be trading involved. He'd go out to see his people once a month and come back with jams and jellies and different preserves made by the family. And what's interesting is he wasn't too big for his britches. He never took on anything that he was not qualified to handle as a lay practitioner. He wouldn't do surgery or even in most circumstances cutting of any sort. The most he would do is lance some fingers and toes. But anytime it was something that he couldn't handle, that's when his neighbors or his fellow islanders would have to go seek professional medical help on the mainland. But mostly he dispensed medicines, which he prepared himself in his own kitchen. He would grind powders with a mortar and pestle or funneling liquids into empty vanilla bottles. But islanders at the time remember 2 of the most frequently prescribed remedies from their childhood with a little bit of mixed feelings. The dark brown bitter and salty cough medicine and the white Creolan gargle for sore throats. Both tasted awful, according to these island residents, but the thing is they both worked well. He had medicines that he created in his kitchen for inducing sleep, being emetic, pain, fever reducers, and was also able to come up with some morphine tablets. So about once a month, Protar, who spent most of his time alone, who liked being alone, who was a recluse, he would hook up a horse to his rig and visit the patients in their homes, sometimes treating the whole family while there. And he would do this once a month. On top of that, they would come or they would have somebody sent to him for their medicines, especially during his last years when he wasn't able to get out very much. Which is interesting because later in life, Protar started mixing baking powder, putting it into new 1-pound cans that could be ordered in the lots of 100 from Sears, and he was giving it to the islanders, saying it was much better for their health than the commercial product then available. Now you're wondering, how did he finance his medical practice? Especially when he was giving all of his medicine and services away for free. Well, he did have his own limited resources. He had sold his stock in the Rock Island newspaper, and what he did is he built wealth in his younger days. And like the true islander he was, he took that wealth to sustain himself in a minimal lifestyle and be able to provide his services that he believed the community needed for free. And it was not just remedies, but he would also make candy, clothing, he would finance books for children, he hired young ones that needed to work, and he always had gifts for friends and neighbors. From time to time, he would hint at his own business matters or possible investments in the diaries, but he did live a simple life. His home was furnished with only the bare necessities for what we call now minimalism. He truly lived day and night, pretty much in a large living room. It was one of the most prominent features was a huge wood-burning stove that was probably acquired secondhand because it was dated as manufactured in 1885. A large cabinet in the back room held all of his medical supplies. The bed in the northeast corner was apparently narrowed by cutting a section out of the middle and rejoining the two sides. He had a horsehair mattress, which didn't seem to be very comfortable, but it was at least mouse-proof. And part of the simplicity was, well, just his clothing. He came to the island in a suit and was probably buried in one. He was not known to have worn that suit or any of the clothing that belonged to that suit in his entire time of living on the island before his death. In summer, he wore dark work shorts and pants with suspenders and sometimes a vest, flat-topped, broad-brimmed hat against the sun, and in cooler weather he added a sweater. That's it. His outer winter clothing consisted of a heavy jacket, island knitted socks, pulled over thick wool pants. He had himself a set of ankle-high waterproof boots and a fur hat. Now what's funny is he did bring a shaving kit to the island, but it's obvious that he never used it. And I think his long beard and his long hair, which had turned snowy white, was kind of for himself symbolic of his new way of life. He would bathe in a rain barrel. He didn't even have a bathtub. He would bathe in a rain barrel at the back of the house. And it was said that he sometimes had to break the ice in it before lowering himself into it. Now, you wouldn't know that he was an angel if you had met him at the time and didn't know anything about him. His English had a noticeable accent. His voice was deep and gruff. And his demeanor was usually quite stern. And, for how much of an angel he was and how much good that he did for the island and the islanders, he wasn't really given easy to friendliness. You had to earn his friendship. Actually, he could be quite forceful when admonishing or correcting others. This tended to put off strangers, as it was probably meant to. But his neighbors and the people who would become his good friends on the island saw through it and saw right down to the core to where his kindly nature was. Now remember, he lived on food from his garden. He frugally preserved much of his harvest at the end of every season. He would, pickling cucumbers, tomatoes, and beets, making sauerkraut and setting up apple or rhubarb vinegar. He apparently boiled down the apple juice until it was thick like jelly, and in the winter dissolved some in hot water to make an invigorating drink for the men and the boys that were out in the woods doing woodcutting. "It's good for you," he would say, as was his usual. Beyond his garden, he foraged. He picked berries, which included juniper, which all of them he would also preserve. He collected mushrooms, although he would not let anybody else do this since he was the only one, in his opinion, on the island that knew with certainty which ones were safe. He would ask the local farmers for the pig's head so he could make head cheese and prepare himself a treat with the fixings for German blood sauces that he made in a pan. Interestingly enough, without sausage casing, which, funny enough, the German delicacy that he loved, the islanders did not much care for. He would also drink copious amounts of really strong black tea, insisting that it was much healthier than the green tea customary among the island's newer inhabitants at the time, the Irish. Sometimes his laundry would be done as a thank you for his medical services. So on rare occasions, Protar would actually come to town, and he would take a drink of beer at the store where a glass mug was actually kept for him. He was not known as a drinker, and he never produced alcohol beverages at his house or bought some to bring home. He just wanted a beer when he came to town. He did smoke, however, rolling his own cigarettes with brown paper that was available on the island. When he had time in the summer, he'd stroll in the woods, usually burying himself deep into the process of philosophy. And all the stuff that he did for the island, he pretty much walked alone. Don't get me wrong. He would take afternoon visits and bring little gifts for the kids and offer good advice, often to the women who were always home. He sometimes settled disputes and even gave legal advice, consulting out of a law book that he owned, which at the time was said to be the only law book on the island. He loved to argue politics, especially with his friend Turner Boyle. And besides his close neighbors, the Bonners and the Boyles, but he would see close neighbors, the Bonners and the Boyles. The Lafreniers became good friends of his, in which the old lady Lafreniers especially enjoyed his visits because he spoke French with them. Now, what's interesting is on these visits, he would not take any food or drink, and he always left for home before nightfall. Now, he did welcome island visitors to his home, especially the children, although he usually greeted them with a gruff, drawn-out, "So," when he discovered them on his premises. But even the children knew he was kind-hearted underneath. He always had cookies or peppermint candy for them, which he doled out equally to avoid fights. Now, through all this time, Protar's health was remarkably good. He had a lot of childhood illnesses. Combined with that he was a city man who had taken up a rough country life, he had really good health in his older age. But then all of a sudden, 3 days before his 87th birthday, he suffered a stroke in his sleep. When Patrick Bonner, his neighbor, went over to make up a fire in the stove in the early morning of Tuesday, March 3rd, he found Protar unconscious and breathing heavily. Frederick Protar passed away at 11:15 that morning, before Dr. Palmer, who was now a doctor that had moved to the island, could make his way over the snowy roads into his cabin. Now, Protar wanted to be buried at sea. In his last will and testament, he said, "If it's good enough for the sailors, it's good enough for me. Go ahead and just put this old body in the sea." Unfortunately, at that time, for him, the U.S. government had made laws against burials at sea out in Lake Michigan, or any of the Great Lakes for that matter. And because of the law, the islanders were not able to fulfill his wish. Protar's funeral was limited to islanders. And a lot of it because, well, no boats were running that time of year. And the islanders got together on their own and built a fieldstone enclosure around his grave, which was built by the late Bill McDonough. And they included a handsome wood gate made by Patrick Bonner, a bronze plaque bearing Protar's likeness, and a memorial subscription expressing the gratitude of the islanders for this angel that had come to them. It was paid for by a collection taken up on Beaver Island. The islanders believed, since he couldn't be buried at sea, it would have been in Protar's nature that the simple tomb and gate and the loving care that the islanders still give to his grave today, all these years later, would mean more to him than any kind of recognition and pomp and ceremony that could be given. Protar really was an island angel. There's no doubt about it. He figured out a way to live well within his financial means, and instead of spending that money on himself, instead of spending that money on stuff, he gave it away. He provided free services to the islanders who needed it. He was a great neighbor. He was a great unofficial doctor. And to many, he was a great friend. For about 20 years, he was basically the island's doctor, the island's lawyer, the island's therapist, and one of the major island benefactors when it came to books and other things that the children or other adults might need. He truly was the island's angel. Gone are the days, I think, where we have a lot of these. Now, one universal truth is that the only constant in this world is change. And with industrialism and commercialism, the island wasn't too far behind. Soon, the logging had gone away, the fishing industry had gotten depleted, and commercial farming made it impossible for island farmers to make any kind of decent money off of the goods that they'd try to ship off island, just due to the shipping costs. And so the island had to change. It had to start selling property to summer residents, which a few decades later turned into a rental and tourist industry. But like what's happening so many other places around the world, this changed from year-round inhabitants in a small-knit community to vacationers who are here simply to visit and enjoy their own lives because they have their own communities back home. But unfortunately, with that change also came less and less of an ability for new generations of islanders to continue that community on their own. I didn't know how to end this documentary, so I wanted to say this. I think I would have rather enjoyed being a friend of Protar. I love being alone and philosophizing about the world. My family and I tend to live not the kind of minimalist lifestyle that he did, not even close. But it is a life that I've kind of always wanted. It's a life that I believe I can do. Especially when the kids are gone, right? There are some of the year-round islanders that have been here for a few generations, and some of us new ones that have moved out here and permanently dug in our roots. There are those of us who revere Dr. Protar. We revere the benevolence it takes to keep a good community. Whereas some consider charity to be coming from philanthropists or huge recognized donations, benevolence to individuals, that's the kind of charity that creates truly a great community. And nowadays, you see an elderly person pulled over on the side of the road, you just stop, help them change his tire, and move on. Somebody needs help moving something, somebody needs help with whatever care that they need. You help and you move on. Too many times when people give huge donations, they also want huge recognition. That recognition being in tax breaks and plaques with their names on the wall, standing for ceremony. But Beaver Island, to this day, I call it one of the last few good small communities left in the United States. And the reason is because of the people that live in this community themselves. Because of the selfless acts by Beaver Islanders that happen almost every single day here that you will never see on social media. You'll never see bragged about on Facebook. And nobody's going to stand them up for ceremony. And it almost feels like Protar started that tradition. That beautiful tradition that carries on today of just sometimes the island needs an angel. Sometimes the island needs somebody who's there for the kids. Sometimes the island needs somebody to just do something for those that are struggling, for those in their time of need. So one can only hope, I think I'm doing Protar right with this little mini documentary when I say that I do truly believe that Beaver Island is one of the last great small communities. And if we want to reverse that pattern, and you want to go home, and you want to start making your small community better again, take the lessons of Feodor Protar. Because he truly was an island angel. And I'm pretty sure that he would love a legacy of nothing than become your community angel yourself.